Welcome to this training video to learn more about how the Department of Education will be tracking student attendance through information provided in the I4C system. We'll walk through introductions so you'll get an idea of the team that's been working on this project. We'll spend most of the focus on helping you understand how you enter school calendar information in I4C and how that's used to calculate ADM. We'll then provide a live demo so you'll have a second chance to see how it works. And finally, talk through the next steps of what you should be doing. There's been a tremendous amount of work done behind the scenes to make this effective and make this happen. So many thanks to all the folks at the Department of Education who worked extremely hard over the past month or so getting this system up and running for all the school districts. The primary focus and need for this information is to calculate ADM, average daily membership. ADM can be thought of similar to what you might think of as FTEs for staff at a school. An FTE may indicate whether a teacher or staff is working part-time or full-time. ADM is similar, but for students. So it thinks about the students in your school and what percentage of the year were they enrolled in your school. Traditionally, we've calculated ADM based on days, or actually half days. And so in the example in the upper right corner here, we've got a student named Sam who might have been enrolled at the beginning of the year, but left January 15th to move out of state. We have to calculate what portion of the year was Sam enrolled in the school. And so if the school, for example, we know is open 360 half days, and that's information used to provide through I4C, and we know Sam had started on the first day and left on January 15th, we can calculate that Sam was enrolled for 182 days, half days, during that year. And so by dividing 182 over 360, which equals 0.51, we calculate that Sam's ADM is 0.51. So Sam was enrolled in school just over half the year. This is used for many factors for the state and the Department of Education. It's used to determine how much funding schools receive. It's used to determine whether the school should be held accountable for how Sam's performed academically, and for other reasons as well, and when you're calculating Title I enrollment or many other factors for the school. So it's very important that this information is accurate. State law has allowed schools not only to track students based on the number of days or half days they're enrolled, but also the number of hours of instruction they receive. So one of the main changes you'll see through this system is that you now can identify the number of hours of instruction for students as opposed to the number of half days or days they're enrolled. So in the similar case for Sam, we might identify that a given school is open 180 hours of instruction over the course of the year. Again, that would be from the first day of school to the last day of school. In the same example where Sam left to move to another state on January 15th, we might calculate based on when Sam started school to when Sam left on the 15th that Sam received 546 hours of instruction. And as such, we calculate the ADM in a very similar way. We take 546 hours that Sam was enrolled in the school for instruction, we divide it by 1080, and we once again get to the same 0.51 ADM. So two ways to calculate ADM, one based on half days, the other based on hours. The way the department is calculating this is going to change. It used to be that you would give us the information in your EOI, your end of year submission, and you would tell us what day the student enrolled in school, what day the student exited school, and you also provided the half days of attendance and the half days of absences. We used those half days of attendance and absences to calculate the number of days the student was enrolled in your school. It's important to point out that regardless of whether a student is in attendance or a student is absent, you're still getting credit for that student during that period of time. So even if a student was absent for 3 or 4 days during a period, that still counts as enrollment. The same thing is true for instruction. Even if they miss a day, they're still counted as being enrolled in your school for instruction during that period of time. Of course, there are laws that deal with truancy and extended absences, but that's not the point of the video today. We're going to be moving to a new format for determining ADM that really just calculates the ADM based on a calendar that you've provided to us. And you've done the calendar for days in the past, so it shouldn't be that much different than what you're used to. But we're going to calculate ADM using that calendar and the entry date and exit date that you provide for us for the students. The half days in session and half days absence, we're going to use that for absenteeism, but we won't be using that to calculate ADM any longer, which hopefully should be a nice improvement for you. So again, just to make it clear, the way we might be doing this is if the school started on 8/31/2004, and I'm going to go back in time just to give an example, and ended on June 7th, 2005, you're going to tell us, and again, you've done this in the past, at least at the days level, of all the different events that you're having throughout the year. So you might tell us that there's a vacation day for this period of time, that there's no school on Columbus Day, there's a winter recess, there's an early PD release day. And as long as you tell us what days those are throughout the year, then we'll know if a student entered on 8/31 and they exited on 1/15, we'll be able to determine that he or she was in school, in this example in 2004, for 168 half days. And we'll be able to do a similar thing in hours, and you'll see how that works in a little while. But the system basically counts the number of days the student was enrolled. And so for this example, we know that the student and the school was opened on August 30th. So we know that that's a day of school. And in yellow in this example indicates that there was an open day of school. And we know that then going through, and in September, the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, they were all open. And we know that because you told us that you were closed for Labor Day, that there was no school, and that's why it's showing in white here in September. And then we know that there was school because you told us again that it opened on August 31st, and there were no events, other events the first week. There were no events the second week. So all these yellow items or yellow boxes are days that the school was open. You might have told us that on October, I believe it's 6th that there was an early release day, so there's only half a day. And we know that you might have told us on October 12th, it looks like there, that it might have been, I believe that's probably Columbus Day, so there was no school. And so basically we're just counting all the yellow boxes and all the half-day boxes to determine the number of days in session for that student between opening school on August 30th and when the student left on January 15th. So again, we can calculate the ADM simply by knowing when the start date and the end date was for that student. So what do you need to do? At the beginning of the year, it's going to be very important, and throughout the year, as your calendar might have changed, for you to update your school annual data. There's going to be a new option called your school calendar, and this is going to be something that you might have seen for days, but it's going to be a little bit different for hours for those of you who want to report in hours. So you'll update your calendar, and you'll keep it updated throughout the year. If you have a snow day in the middle of the year, you'll add that event to your calendar. If you change the end date of your school, you'll update the end date of your school in your calendar. And then at the end of the year, you'll submit your EOI just as you've done in the past. And one thing we'll ask you to do, which you should be doing already, is to verify your reports that identify the ADM for your students, along with all your other reports. There's going to be a new calendar report as well that you'll be able to verify. And so we'll ask that you do that. Some additional things to consider. It's going to be very important, or not. It's going to be important that if you have a different end date for your grade 12 students, that you indicate that. If you have a different start date for kindergarten, maybe kindergarten didn't start until a week later, that you indicate the first day of kindergarten, and we'll show you how you do that. It's important that you have your EOI entry and exit dates in place in your EOI file. And of course, that's something you've been doing forever. So there's no really change in that. It's just important that they're accurate. Your EOI attendance and absences, we're going to use that as a second check, but it's not going to be a primary check for ADM any longer. And we'll be using the ratio of attendance and absences to determine your absenteeism for your school. And so even though you might report your school in hours now, even if you put half days in the EOI attendance and absences, we'll still be able to use that to determine the percent of absenteeism for a student. Okay, so let me switch over and give you a live demo now. So now we'll go to the I4C homepage, and in this example, we're logged in here as Portsmouth. You should be already familiar with the fact that under school, there's always been a school annual data tab or option. There's now a submenu called School Annual Calendar. You can always get to the calendar from School Annual Data. So I'm going to go to the School Annual Data, which you should be familiar with. And you can now see that there's a calendar button here. So this calendar button brings you to the same place as if you went to School Annual Calendar, and we'll see that in a minute. The first thing you need to be doing is what you've done in the past. You need to review your calendar and you need to make sure that you've got the right minimum grade for your school and the maximum grade. You need to let us know if your kindergarten is full-time or not. You need to make sure you got the principals accurate, etc. One change you'll see here is we now have the option to specify your calendar type. And so right now we're saying that this school is going to report their annual instruction or opening in days. But you also have the ability now to change this to hours, and we'll take a look at that in just a minute. But for now, let's go ahead and let's assume that New Franklin School in Portsmouth wants to report their school calendar in days. So they leave it in days and they click on calendar. And this, again, should be something that you probably are familiar with, although we've updated it a little bit, so it has some additional information. You'll see at the top, it shows you the total half days, and it shows you it for grade ranges. You're going to see that we've got 3 different grade ranges. We've got a grade range for kindergarten, because we know that kindergartens may have a slightly different schedule. We have a grade range for grades 1 through 6, and this has to do with legislation. There are a certain number of, especially if we're looking at hours, that we expect students to have instruction through grades 1 through 6. And then there's going to be a third bucket that's grades 7 through 12. You'll only see what applies to your school. So in this school, since in this case, we've got an elementary school that's a K to 5, we're only seeing the bucket for K and the bucket for grades 1 through 6. Again, realize that although this says 1 to 6, we know this school only goes up to grade 5. So the calendar for this school will only be used, of course, for students up through grade 5. The same thing goes with the last bucket, which we don't see here, which would be 7 through 12. We realize that for a middle school, if you're filling this out, although it says 7 through 12, that might be a little bit confusing. We are, of course, only using it for the middle school grades, which might only go up to grade 8. The same thing goes with high school. We'd only be using 9 to 12. The total half days is now calculated automatically. So before, where you might have had to enter the number of half days in session, you don't do that anymore. We do that for you. What you'll have to specify is the start date and the end date. And you'll see that this should all be defaulted already for you when you first come into your system based on the calendar information you've already entered this year. And you'll have to specify the events that are happening throughout the year. Again, you should be familiar with this process: Labor Day, Columbus Day, Veterans Day, your vacation days, etc. In this example, we might find it defaulted to the school start date and end date for your entire school, but maybe in this case, your kindergartners didn't start till a week later. So all we simply do is click Edit, change the start date. So instead of being 8/27, we'll see if I can do this on the fly, but it looks like 9/2 is Labor Day. That would have been next week. So why don't we'll assume that they would have started the day after Labor Day, so 9/3. And they ended on the same day. Let's assume that's the case. And what we're going to see as I save this, the total number of half days in session is going to be decreased because the system knows they started a week later. So instead of 366, we're now at 358 half days. So again, you should find that as a good benefit that the system is calculating your total half days in session for you. Similarly with your events, maybe we had another snow day, so it looks like there's already a snow day put in here for 12/3, but let's assume we had another snow day. You can easily add an event, enter the type of event, so we'll say this is a snow day, enter the event date, so we'll say this may be 12/4, we had a snow day 2 days in a row, hopefully 12/4 is not a weekend, but we'll find out. And we're going to specify that school was closed, there was no school that day. And this is only for New Franklin. But you could easily say this is for all schools, and by entering this once, it would automatically populate your calendar for all your schools. So the event was added, and we can see the number of half days went down for both the grades 1 through 6 and the kindergarten school. So easy to enter events. Maybe the other thing that happened though is maybe we extended the school year because of those 2 snow days for 2 days. So let me go ahead and click Edit for here, and we'll change 6/14. I don't know if 6/14 is a Friday or not, but let's assume it's midweek. So we'll change that to the 16th, and we'll see. We'll see if the kindergartners, that's what we're looking at, is the kindergartner range, should change from 356, and it should theoretically go up 4 half days, and it did. And we could do the same thing if we extended school for grades 1 through 6. So one thing that I didn't mention as we were doing this, and we should see that goes from 364 to 368, is that these, at the top here is the start and end date, which you have to enter. We do these for each grade range, and again, as I kind of mentioned, it might be different for kindergarten and for other grades. The events we're assuming are applicable across all grade levels. So that's basically what you need to do. There's a button here that lets you go back to the school annual data table. So if you click school annual data, that brings us back to the table. You might have seen next to it was actually a school selection list, so I could have switched schools right there. But what I want to do now is say, you know what, New Franklin actually isn't reporting in kindergarten in days. We're going to report in hours. Maybe we're going to do that for all our calendars, but we'll start with New Franklin. So now I'm going to switch to the calendar from, oops, I didn't mean to do that. I meant to edit this record, and so I'm going to edit New Franklin and say instead of doing hours, we're doing days. I'm sorry, instead of doing days, we're doing hours. And I'm going to go ahead and save that. And now it's specifying hours. And now we're going to see if we go back to the calendar, it's going to look slightly different. Now what we see is the same start and end dates that we had, but we now have hours per day throughout the week. And the same thing goes for kindergarten and for grades 1 through 6. You'll see the events now, for each event, actually has the number of hours of instruction during those events. Because all these events were events that the school was closed, you'll see that the hours of instruction show 0. But we might have something like a PD day or an early release day where there's 2 hours of instruction or 3 hours of instruction. And I'll show you how we can add that. The first thing you want to do is make sure that the hours of instruction is correct each day of the week. Maybe, I doubt this is the case, but maybe your kindergartners come in an hour later every day than the rest of the students. And so in that case, maybe they're actually only in school for 4.25 hours per day. Again, probably not the case, or we'll actually say 4.75. Maybe they come in half an hour later. So I'm going to paste that through the entire week. And we'll save that. What we're going to see is that the total hours of instruction for kindergarten is going to drop. It's because it's an hour or less each day of the week. And so instead of 955 hours, there's actually 864 hours. So, again, as we described before, and I should have mentioned this when we first came to the screen, the system will automatically calculate the hours based on the number of hours you tell us students are instructed each day, and the events throughout the year that we have to kind of basically subtract from this range of time. It's important to mention that this is hours of instruction. So even though your school might be open for 6 hours or 7 hours during the day from when the students get there, the beginning of the day to the end of the day, this should only include the instructional hours. So, for example, lunch, is not included as hours of instruction. Again, as I mentioned earlier, similar to the day, when you're reporting days, you can add events. Let's go ahead for this example and add a professional development event. And so maybe there was an early release because we do a PD day during the morning. Maybe this happened on, let's say this happened on 10/16, 2019. And this was for both kindergarten and grade 1s through 6. They all came in that day, and perhaps kindergartners were there for 3 hours, and as was grades 1 through 6, or one in this case, really, it's 1 through 5. We want to say that the school is not closed because it was open for those 3 hours, and we can put in here, PD early release. We indicate that, again, we could indicate this is all the elementary schools. Maybe this is an elementary school thing, or in this case, I'm just going to do it for New Franklin. We insert the event, and what we're going to see actually is that 864.25 that we just saw, that just went down, because now we're saying on 10/16, which normally would have been, I'm not so sure what day of the week it was, but assuming it was a Tuesday, it might have been 4.75 hours for kindergartners and 5.25 hours for grades 1 through 5. Now we're saying it was only 3 hours. And so both these total hours instruction would have been decreased to indicate that they were only in school 3 hours that day instead of the 4.75 or the 5.25. So again, fairly straightforward process. You put in the hours for events, and the system automatically calculates the total instructional hours for the students. The next thing that I want to point out is that you can actually also add different number of hours for a range of time. So perhaps your number of hours of instruction changed as of the COVID-19 pandemic came into impact. And maybe you changed at that point in March where on Wednesdays you didn't offer instruction or the instruction was a different number of hours. And so what you could do is you can add a new hour range, and we can basically say from the beginning of this impact, say it was 3/15/2020, until the end of the year, which was 6/14/2020. For kindergarten, we no longer were doing 4.75 every day. Maybe we were only doing 4 hours on Monday and Tuesday. And on Wednesdays, we had given the kids a day off, and we did 4 hours on Thursday and Friday. And we're just doing that for New Franklin. And again, what we're going to see is this 862 hours is going to decrease. And actually, why don't we say on Wednesdays, maybe the kids had 2 hours of instruction. So we insert this item. Oh, and I needed to mention that this was for New Franklin. I forgot to select the school. And now we see that the total number of hours went down to 794. We now see for kindergarten that there's 2 records. It started in 827, and this was the instructional hours. Then beginning on 315, we changed the number of instructional hours. We can see in grades 1 through 6, this is the number of instructional hours. And we could do the same thing for grades 1 through 6 if those changed as well. The last thing, and that's basically what we're asking you to do. We're asking you to put in the start and stop dates and the number of hours if you want to report by hours. We want to make sure that you enter all the events and any early release days and how many hours of instruction happened during those early release days. And that's it. The system will automatically be able to calculate your ADM for your students based on when they first started and when they exited your school. One more thing to point out, there is instructions for updating your school annual calendar here on the website as well. So if you click on that, just for interest of time, I'm just going to pop it right up. But there is this help document here, and we definitely encourage you to take a look at this help document as well. So the last thing I want to do is just come back to the PowerPoint and come up with a couple of other additional items so you'll know what to do next. So next steps, as we talked earlier, you want to review and correct as needed your school calendar. You want to go ahead and submit your EOIs as you typically do, and then you need to verify your reports as you typically do. There'll be a new calendar report, and there'll be a separate short webinar that'll talk you through that if you have any questions. But it's a simple, straightforward additional report. Again, as you think a little bit more detail about what it means for all schools, we want you to go to the school annual data. We want you to verify the information for each school, just as you've done in the past. We want you to update your calendar type, so if you need a report by hours, you change it to hours. We want you to click on the calendar for each one of those schools and make sure that the setup is correct. And then once you're done reviewing your calendars, there'll again be a confirmation in the I4C system as well, where you'll be able to confirm your calendars. For schools reporting by day, for the most part, everything should be correct. Your start and end dates should be correct, but make sure they are, and you want to make sure you've got the right events. If you're reporting by hours, once you switch to indicate by hours, you're going to again click on the calendar and make sure the number of hours of instruction, remember instruction, per day is correct. You want to update the hours for each date range. You'll want to add date ranges if the hours change midway through the year. And then again, you'll want to add any events or review your events to make sure if there's any hours, any differences in hours for any given day, again, snow days or early release days, etc., that you have those entered. Finally, when you do enter your end of year submissions, you'll want to make sure that you review the reports and pay close attention this year to make sure that the ADM looks as you would expect it, the ADM for each student. And so there are several reports. There's an ADM report that's called ADM report, including F&R. There's an EOI determination report. There's ADM by student counts, and there's also an EOI adjusted average daily membership for adequacy. These are all reports that are in your district verification reports for EOI, And you'll just want to pay extra close attention to those this year to make sure that the ADM looks good. And again, think of it again like you do for an FT in a school where a teacher might be part-time. Same concept for students. You want to make sure a student who was there all year should have one full ADM. A student who might have departed, halfway through the year, that their ADM looks appropriate. And there's also on the state reports a report that you should be familiar with. It's the one SACID too many days. This is just to make sure that if you report a student enrolled from from September through January, and another school district reports the same student enrolled for a period of time, that you're not both claiming the student for a similar period of time that's causing the student to be enrolled in the state more than a full ADM. So you want to make sure you review that. Finally, we don't want you to struggle. Please, look for these help documents. Reach out to us if you need it. As I mentioned earlier, again, there's a help document right on the website itself, on the calendar site. That you can submit a help desk ticket anytime if you've got a question. Please contact your own I4C coordinators. Many of you may be I4C coordinators watching this, but for those of you who aren't, they're another resource within your school district. And then finally, you can call us for additional help as well. But please don't struggle. So with that, thank you for watching this video. We hope it was helpful. And again, please reach out to us. Take care.